My husband handed me divorce papers on an ordinary Thursday evening, as casually as if he were passing me a restaurant menu. No warning, no argument, no build-up, just a beige envelope placed beside my plate at our favorite Italian restaurant. "Elodie," he said quietly, "I think this is the right decision." I looked at him, then at the envelope, then back at him. His hands were shaking, barely, but enough for me to notice. He wasn't nervous because he wanted a divorce. He was nervous because he was hoping I would refuse, but I didn't. I opened the envelope, scanned the documents, picked up the pen that had been sitting beside my wine glass, and signed my name at the bottom. My signature looked steady, elegant, strangely peaceful. I slid the papers back across the table. "Your attorney can proceed whenever he's ready," I said. Julian's face drained of color. "Wait, what are you doing?" he whispered, voice cracking. "Exactly what you asked," I replied. "You brought me divorce papers during dinner, Julian. What outcome did you expect?" His mouth opened, closed, opened again. No sound came out. In 7 years of marriage, I had never seen him speechless. "You're supposed to fight for us," he finally managed, the words so soft I almost missed them, and that was the moment I understood. This wasn't about divorce. This was a test he did not create on his own. A test he and his friends, grown men with the emotional maturity of houseplants, had designed to prove whether I was devoted enough, sentimental enough, dramatic enough to perform heartbreak for their entertainment. They expected me to cry. They expected me to plead. They expected me to beg for a marriage I had spent almost a decade nurturing with honesty and stability. Instead, I signed, because I do not beg, I do not chase, and I do not participate in manipulative theater. What Julian did not know then, but would learn only hours later, was that his closest friend would show me every message, every plan, and every smug prediction they had made about my reaction. And by the time the truth came out, it was already far too late to undo the damage. But to understand how we ended up at that dinner table, me signing divorce papers, Julian staring at me like I had become a stranger, you need the full story. You need to know who we were before the test. You need to know what he lost. When everything was still whole, I met Julian 9 years earlier at a community art gallery opening. I had been dragged there by my coworker Rachel, who insisted I needed a break after spending almost a month buried in zoning proposals for a redevelopment project. It was one of those pretentious Thurs, a-night events where everyone pretends to understand modern art while holding wine in flimsy plastic cups. Julian was standing in front of the same abstract painting I had stopped at a chaotic spiral of blues and grays that, in my opinion, represented urban isolation. He glanced at me when I approached. "I'm pretty sure this is just someone charging money for spilled paint," he said. I laughed, genuinely laughed, the kind that sneaks out of you because it surprises you. We walked through the exhibit together, making increasingly absurd interpretations of the pieces. "That sculpture is the emotional journey of a forgotten grocery list," I said. "That photograph is the existential crisis of refrigerator magnets," he countered. By the end of the night, my cheeks hurt from smiling. We exchanged numbers, coffee twice that week, dinner the week after. Falling into each other felt natural, steady, almost inevitable. Julian proposed on a foggy beach morning a little less than 3 years later. He looked terrified, like he thought I'd say no despite the fact that we had been inseparable since the night we met. Our wedding was small. Close family, a handful of friends, no theatrics, no performance, no attention. Seeking displays, just vows we wrote ourselves. His made people cry. Mine made people laugh. It felt perfect. Our life settled into a comfortable rhythm, a loft downtown with exposed brick and sunlit windows, weekend brunch experiments that usually ended with smoke alarms beeping and takeout containers on the floor, conversations at midnight about future kids, future homes, future versions of ourselves. We were solid, steady, healthy, or so I believed. Looking back, the cracks were there, small ones, almost invisible. Julian was easily influenced, not in a childish way, but in a subtle, absorbing way. He adopted ideas from the loudest voices around him. It hadn't mattered when the voices were good ones, family, neighbors, co-workers who meant well. But then came Derek. 2, the beginning of the rot Julian's younger sister, Claire, was the first to sense the shift. One afternoon, she came over for coffee and mentioned that Julian's old college friends were back in town. Marcus is throwing a birthday party next month, she said, stirring her coffee a bit too aggressively. Julian said he's excited to reconnect. That's nice, I replied. He never talks about them. Claire hesitated. Those guys, they weren't great influences. They made him insecure, competitive in a bad way, always trying to impress people who didn't matter. I shrugged. College was a long time ago. She nodded, but she didn't look convinced. I should have listened. At Marcus's rooftop birthday party, I met them. Derek and Connor, the duo I would later mentally label the root of all stupidity. Derek had the kind of confidence that announces itself like a marching band, loud, invasive, and deeply insecure beneath the surface. Connor hovered beside him like a loyal shadow. Julian lit up when he saw them, not in a nostalgic way, in a hungry way, a way that made my stomach knot. Derek looked me up and down and said, "So this is a Lodi. Julian talks about you a lot." I smiled politely. "Hopefully good things." He didn't answer. Instead, he launched into a speech. Because of course he did, about modern relationships, how men had lost control, how women had become too comfortable, and how partners needed to be put in their place to prevent complacency. Julian listened, not with skepticism, with interest, with admiration. That was the moment I felt the first cold tremor of fear. This wasn't the man I married, and Derek knew exactly what he was doing. By the following week, Julian's schedule had transformed without warning. Poker nights, drinks after work, golf outings, endless group chats. He came home smelling like cigar smoke and bourbon, laughing at jokes I wasn't part of. He'd stare at his phone instead of greeting me. Our conversations turned stiff, hollow, interrupted by notifications he rushed to read. One night, when I suggested watching a documentary we'd been waiting for, he didn't even look up. "I'm not in the mood," he muttered. "We've been planning to watch it for weeks." "I'm not obligated to entertain you, Elodie." I froze, because those were not Julian's words. They were Derek's, and Julian didn't even realize it. 3. The testing begins. It started with a sentence that sounded rehearsed. "Let me see your phone." I blinked. Why? If you have nothing to hide, it shouldn't be a problem. I should have laughed. Should have walked away, but I handed it over unlocked. He scrolled through my messages, emails, photos, my entire life, searching for something that didn't exist. He found nothing, and he looked disappointed. 4 days later, he asked again. "No," I said calmly. His eyes widened, almost triumphant. "Aha, what are you hiding?" "Privacy." I answered, "That's all." He stormed off, phone already in hand, thumbs moving rapidly. Reporting back, no doubt. That evening, I found something that made my blood run cold. His gym bag was open on the counter. Inside was a notebook, not hidden, not locked away, just sitting there, and inside the notebook a list. Written in his handwriting: phone test failed, jealousy test, pending financial dependency question, pending transformation, hypothetical, pending tests, plural, a planned sequence, evaluations, like I was an employee on probation. I took a photo of the page and put the notebook back exactly where I found it. The questions began immediately. Would you still love me if I lost my job? Would you leave me if I gained a lot of weight? And then, would you still love me if I turned into a tree? I stared at him. Are we talking full mythical transformation? Because if you become an oak overnight, I'm not watering you every day while you contemplate photosynthesis. He didn't laugh. Every answer I gave was wrong. Not emotional enough, not dramatic enough, not validating the script they fed him. He wanted grand declarations of devotion I had never performed, not once in our 9 years together, not because I didn't love him, but because our relationship was built on steadiness, not theatrical desperation. Yet here he was, treating our marriage like a game show. Every time he asked a question, he checked his phone afterward. Every time I answered incorrectly, he typed something quickly, angrily, and then came the final test. The divorce papers, the ultimate trap, the one they were sure I would fail in the way they wanted me to fail. Crying, chasing, begging, showing proof that I feared losing him. Instead, I signed, and the game imploded. For the truth comes, Julian dropped me off at home after dinner, stunned into silence. I went to our loft, changed into pajamas, and curled up on the couch with a blanket. An hour later, there was a knock at the door. It was Connor. He looked shaken, pale, unlike the eager shadow I had met weeks earlier. "Elodie," he said, voice trembling, "you need to see this." He showed me his phone, screenshots, group chats, plans. Messages from Derek and Julian strategizing the test. How to provoke me, how to trap me, how to interpret every reaction, even breathing, as evidence of my supposed failings. Connor whispered, "I didn't know they would actually go through with the final part. I told Julian it was childish. I told Derek it was cruel. They didn't listen. He swallowed hard when you signed the papers. Julian panicked. He thinks he ruined everything. I said nothing." What was there to say? Connor left moments later, guilt weighing so heavily on him that he could barely make eye contact. 5 minutes after he left, Julian burst through the door. "Elodie, please, wait, listen." I stood up slowly. "Why?" I asked quietly. "So you can run another test, evaluate another reaction, add another line to your notebook." His face crumpled. "I didn't mean you meant all of it." I said, "You let someone convince you that emotional manipulation is love. You let idiots dictate the health of our marriage. You let them turn you into someone I don't recognize." He stepped forward. "I can fix this." "No," I replied. "You can't, please," he whispered. "I don't want a divorce." "You should have thought of that before you handed me the papers." Julian dropped to his knees, literally begging, crying, the very scene he had expected me to perform. I watched him, the man I loved, the man I believed in, the man who had allowed strangers to weaponize insecurity against everything we had built, and I felt nothing, no anger, no sadness, no victory. Just the quiet clarity of a woman who knew her marriage had died long before she signed those papers. "Get up," I said softly. "This isn't a test. This is real." He looked up at me, stunned. "Elodie, please." I shook my head. "You destroyed our marriage trying to measure it. You broke trust trying to prove it existed. You chose doubt over communication, games over honesty, tests over love." I picked up the envelope from the hall table and placed it in his hands. "You wanted proof," I said. "Here it is." He stared at the papers like they were burning through his skin. "Elodie, goodbye, Julian." And I walked into the bedroom, closed the door, and locked it.